Good evening and welcome to Inside the Rookery Season 9, Episode 7. Me and Andy Leask are here to talk with Josh Wakerely about something close to the Rookery's heart, that is creating system-agnostic TTRPG supplements. So welcome to Inside the Rookery, Josh. You'll see that Josh is having some problems with his camera, so we've decided to just have Josh as a beautiful picture who will flash as he speaks. So, Josh, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm Josh of Hive Mind Games. I make board games and TTRPGs and some silly tie-in marginalia merch. And the good news is I look better in still anyway. So this works well for me.
Yeah, I feel like we could all have like touch up our appearances, Andy, and we should all have gone to gone to still. But no, we are sadly for you all, we are still very very live. So as always, we've had questions pre-submitted on our Discord server from our lovely patrons. So thank you for that, and I will be bringing them up on screen as we go through. But do pop your comments live in the chat, and I will bring them up on screen like this from 101 Colonel or this from Second Hand Samurai as we go through. And yeah, let's get into it. So, Martine straight up asks, why go system agnostic and not say go with an open license like D&D?
So without getting too specific on it, I find that it's for content that's more thematic rather than mechanical, like combat and stuff like that. It's very feasible to stay system agnostic and leave some of those specifics to the DM to trust them with it, and let them adapt it.
Mm-hmm. Andy, what do you want to add something on behalf of Rookery? Like, why did we think about system agnostic systems? You know what I mean, system agnostic supplements.
Yeah, essentially what Josh was saying there, like, there is there's so many different types of stories that you can tell, and that's what we're most interested in is telling stories through these games, or rather facilitating GMs and players to tell stories kind of through these games. And I think it's like one of the things that we kind of realized, and it's a shame that it took decades of working in the industry to realize it. But like, even if people are playing in a system, so even if people are going, oh yeah, we're playing D&D, like what's happening at every table is going to be at least slightly different, potentially radically different, depending on house rules and interpretations and which supplements they're using and what stories they're choosing to tell. And once you realize that GMs are going through the process of adapting things anyway, you're like, well, rather than locking stuff in that makes it harder to adapt because it's designed for one particular, square peg for a square hole, if you make a peg, is this metaphor working? A peg that's like full, that can fit different shaped holes, a skeleton peg, if you will. I don't know. I lost confidence in that metaphor halfway through, but I think that was something as we were knocking it around. We were going, well, we could do this system, we could do that system, we could use this open source thing. And we're like, well, actually, let's try and do something that we could use in any of them. Because we know that if GMs want to use our stuff, they will change it. They will want to change it. So let's make it easy for people to kind of do that. So, yeah.
Cool. And Eris Shrugged asks, systems often come with a certain amount of character, e.g. Wifrup's professions bring an implied setting. How does that impact on your design for system agnostic design?
I'm trusting the DMs with that as well. We've gone for a vibe in terms of the interactions. It's slightly darker fantasy. It's quite upfront with saying that it's inspired by those moments in Dark Souls and Elden Ring where you stumble upon a place that's oddly serene or tranquil, and you have a strangely somber interaction with a weird little guy. The other main inspiration for it was the scenes in stuff like Lord of the Rings where they're sitting around a campfire.
Yeah.
And it's a moment. I think all too often in RPGs, it's I guess we set up camp and we sleep and reset spell slots. Shrug, cool, move on. So yeah, like trying to insert a little bit of meaning and a little bit of atmosphere to those scenes doesn't necessarily need to be tied to any system. And DMs might find that those scenes are dragged in one way or another by the systems they're using. But yeah, there are plenty of darker fantasy settings that it will work great with.
And you talked there about like some inspiration, but more generally, like what was your inspiration to get into this industry? Like, were you one of those people that was a GM first and was writing loads and loads of stuff for your own games and then decided, well, actually, I'm really good at this, I'd like to make some money about it? Or did you come in through a different creative industry or something else altogether?
I fell into the industry by accident. I've been playing a lot of tabletop since I was young. I was DMing on and off for years anyway, and always really enjoyed that as a creative outlet. It was during lockdown. A friend and I decided to have a stab at it. And I was meant to mostly be on the boring side of things. I was meant to be sort of numbers and keeping the gears churning away. And yeah, found myself drawn more and more into the creative side of things. I realized, actually, I really like brainstorming these ideas and then editing them. And actually, I quite like writing them. And now, 3 years later, 4 years later, 5 now actually, I'm solo and writing stuff that I love. Previously, I was in insurance, so I could not have been further from a creative pursuit.
It's interesting because my day job is in banking, and originally I got into this industry like through editing, reading over, supporting Andy Law as his kind of editor, and then slowly but surely like saying, oh well, how about this, and starting to add ideas, and then moving over to actually writing and creating. So it's quite I think sounds familiar to me.
Yeah, exactly how it went for me.
Yeah.
One of the things I like about just what you were saying there about Side Lesser Travel Road, particularly in terms of giving these little encounters meaning. Like in my experience, whenever there is more detail than just we kind of move on, it tends to be tables. And I know some GMs love like random tables, but as somebody who enjoys constructing stories, I don't always like leaving it to random tables. So I like the fact that this feels a bit more like crafted, so that as a GM you can choose what you're doing rather than just surrendering to the dice. Yeah,
I like that.
Curated. That's the word.
Curated experience.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a couple that do have some tables on there, but we tried to make sure that there is a framework to keep it sort of role play focused. There's one or two that's slightly more frivolous. But yeah, for the most part, those tables, one of them that one of the freelancers is working on, Emma Birch, you're sitting around a fire with a forester who's isolated and socially starved, and he's asking some potentially quite precocious questions, but they really are there to prompt the players to get in character a bit and draw something out. The DM's got a choice of what ones to ask or to roll on the table. And then each option also got a slightly lighter variant, like, it sounds like that person's been a lot of support to you, and to prompt us, or maybe a fond memory for the character. But then the other one is, about a rival or an enemy that person's maybe had. So there's still a little bit of classic table stuff in there, but there's a little bit of flexibility, and it's meant to just provide a structure, provide a framework for the characters at the end to jump off.
Exactly. Like I'm not biased against tables. I don't want to get the big table lobby upset. But what I mean is that you could, so for instance, you're rolling on a table there, but you've made a choice that you're going to have an encounter that's about drawing your players out and talking a bit more in character. Then sure, there's some randomity in terms, or there can be randomity in terms of how you do that, but it's that initial choice as a GM. That's the type of story that I want to tell, or that's the type of scene I want to tell within this story. That's what I love about it.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that they can be like really powerful moments in your campaign. And I don't know if it's just me, but I'm the kind of person that if I'm on the train, or if I'm in a cafe, or if I'm in a shop, or if I'm in the street, people will ask me for help. So people will be like, can you tell me the way here? Or they'll think I work in the place, or they'll just like start talking to me on a train table. And I don't like go out of my way to talk to people, because like I'm not like that, but people always talk to me, and once they start talking to me, I just can't stop like finding out stuff about them. So I've met like so many people on trains and in cafes where Andy's like, you now know, they're like, because I'll message him and be like, I now know these people's entire life history. They're a retired couple from Australia. They have 2 children, one studying in America and one studying in the UK. They're traveling around by train, and they got the first class thing, but you can only buy the first, you have to buy the first class extra. And that's how I met them, because I was in first class for work. and I think they're like really life affirming moments where you're traveling and you come together with people and you just connect as humans, and you understand like, well, what's their experience like? You're curious, what's their experience like back in Australia? Why did they come to Europe? What do they think of it? Like, what will it be like for me, like in 20 years when my children are like completely grown up and maybe have families of their own, maybe don't. And I think that's something that in a lot of role-playing books, that human aspect of us being social creatures is really forgotten. Like, it really falls by the wayside. And that, for me, like, I've learned loads about myself from being open to having those conversations with people, coffee chats at work, people I meet on the train. And I think the way to learn more about your character that you're role playing and to role play them better is to have those kind of no pressure. There's not like a plot we have to do. There's not a big bad we have to attack right now. We just are allowed, we have permission to sit here and explore our characters and the characters we meet. So I'm really excited to do a late pledge. I'm going to bring up the thing here so I can read it too and just see, like, you know, where your mind has gone in that space, Josh.
This is actually absolutely fascinating you to say that, because I've not put it in those, not really thought of it from that direction before. I absolutely love those moments as well. I love chatting to strangers. You just, you know, you find out weird little life facts, and there's something about chatting to a stranger that, I don't know, people tend to just open up and just reveal weird little tidbits, and it's normally light and interesting and fun. But yeah, contrasting that against the tabletop, you're kind of relying on players and characters to almost force those conversations when someone wants to bring up a bit of backstory or something. So yeah, that's interesting, sort of using those real world conversations and how they do sort of turn into a trade of backstory.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Definitely going to be pondering that as I write.
Yeah, trade of backstory, because you look for connections. Certainly I do. Like, I'm always looking for those, like, and why, and I'm always trying to find out, like, why would you do that? Why have you done this? Why are you here? Like, what are you interested in? What makes you you? And yeah, having that as a tool for GMs to be able to plan that in advance, because sometimes I think, especially if you're a GM that's just starting out, it can be really hard if your players are just suddenly like, hey, NPC I've just encountered, like, where are you from? Like, where did you grow up? Like, do you have any family? Like, all the random questions. So if they know that you're going to have that an encounter like that, and they're planning for it, then they can plan for that kind of established backstories. Like, why are you here? How did you get in my bedroom? I probably met you on a train, found out where you lived, and decided to bring you some food I discovered that you liked, because it
is interesting, and I think it's also good as well. like I think you're right for new GMs, Lindsay, but also for new players. Like I find like, when in my last school when I was running that little kind of Woofer campaign with a bunch of students, and like 2 of them had played a little bit of D&D before, and the rest of them had never played anything before, and it was really interesting because they had no idea what they were meant to do, and it was really, we did Night of Blood first of all, and again I spent quite a long time just trying to kind of break down and just get them chatting, and they kept stopping and being like, I don't know, and I'm like, make it up, it's your character, make it up. And then once they began to get that freedom of being like, oh it's okay for me just to kind of come up with that, it was good.
Yeah. So Abs says, I have created an absicus that expresses stats as words that change somewhat per setting scenario milieu, which I really like. Converting them to corresponding values in some of the bigger systems. So it feels like Abs has kind of designed their own underlying system agnostic translator for themselves,
like a Rosetta Stone
like a Rosetta Stone. So Abs, have you come across any good ways of presenting stats system agnostically, or good conversion tables, etc.? I mean, to be honest, I quite like Abs's idea.
I'm shook at that because I've got a draft for converting between systems that sounds remarkably like that, and I thought I was very clever and I was going to blow the whole system wide open. But for Beside the Lesser Travel Road, I trusted DMs to drop in encounters in the couple of places they're needed. There's 1 or 2 places where it says, maybe there's a little encounter here and then a larger one here. But for the most part, it's mostly about sort of the odd dice roll that might be needed or the odd reward. So I've got a couple of pages up front that just broadly touch upon what some of those terms might be. When I refer to a small, a medium, or a large treasure, or small, medium, large coin purse, what might that look like in a couple of systems? Just to, it's not too hard to blast through D&D, Pathfinder, maybe Mortborg, and 3-4 others, just as a bit of guidance. Also gives us the freedom to not have to get into that in each scene, in each encounter, because we can use those little keywords as shorthand.
Yeah, Ab says an Absetta stone. Nice. So I'm going to pick up this one. So Shadition asks, how can we encourage community creation of system agnostic content whilst minimizing the risk of copyright infringement when they emulate or expand upon existing frameworks?
I guess for the first part of that, it's just going to vary wildly from creator to creator and potentially project to project. I know people who quite like hacking onto existing indie systems, and they just sort of like having that foundation and being able to springboard off it. Other folks like creating a system from scratch for every release. I tend to try and fit things to the project. I released Ritual last year, which is Ookie Spooky. That's got a custom system because it required one to pull it off. Beside the Lesser Travel Road, with it being atmospheric and sort of vibe based and roleplay based, it didn't need to be tied to a system, so I got to keep it system agnostic. I do think it gets a little trickier when you're writing specific adventures. That can be quite difficult to keep system agnostic, I think, without leaving too much to the DM. If a DM buys an adventure, they want it to do some of the heavy lifting for them. But I don't really know how to encourage that more often, really. I think it's always going to be tied to the creator's preference.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear people's thoughts in the comments. Before I'll just bring up Secondhand Samurai's comment about Ab's idea. Like many RPG moments of epiphany, whatever you thought of was already done by Greg Stafford in the 1980s. And Mark McGranahan agrees.
It's funny because it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah, Andy.
the community side of it, I think, is interesting for us because obviously, before COVID-related delays and so on, our long gestating Ship of Fools, when we did that, our first kind of like play test of that, and it was a radically different product then than it's going to be when it reaches its final form. But again, that Ship of Fools is a system agnostic adventure, and we deliberately, when we were playtesting it, like tried to get people to playtest it in as many different systems as possible.
Yeah.
So we wanted people using Wifrit, we wanted people using D&D, we had somebody use the Expanse RPG and turned it into Spaceship of Fools. We had all of these different interpretations, and it was great. And like genuinely, as the kind of writers and designers of it, it was just enormously like gratifying to see people taking picking up our ball and just running with it and just doing something really interesting. But it was also great to get the feedback on how the system agnostic stuff kind of worked and how like it mostly did. And I think it's perhaps not a surprise because it was Andy Law who handled the mechanics of the system agnostic stuff, and he's a good he knows the numbers, he crunches the numbers, he works it out, so he was able to kind of have the good underlying architecture. What was most interesting was the little world building details that didn't transfer system agnostically. So for instance, we've spoken about this example before. I won't go into too much detail in case anybody hasn't seen those streams and then later picks up Ship of Fools. But there is a creature that features in it, and our original and there is an egg which is tied to said creature, and our original choice of creature in Wifrit lays eggs, but in D&D gives live birth, which we did not know. So when we release it, they're like, that's great, but this thing doesn't lay eggs. And we're like, oh, okay, right. But what that actually inspired us to do is come up with our own creature. So instead of just taking a standard fantasy, though, we'll actually, to make it, because we also looked at it and went, well, this monster is far scarier in this system than it is in that system. And that's particularly a problem for D&D with its kind of level scaling thing of sometimes certain creatures are artificially like reduced in terms of their threat so that they can fit in at a certain level. And we were like, well, no, we want this to be a danger to any potential party. And that becomes much easier if you make it your own monster, because then there is no existing framework for you to worry about. So that was quite a useful world building design. What we had worried about and what we had sometimes almost leaned into was making things we were like, we're like generic is the enemy, but also at the same time, if it's going to be universal, it maybe has to be. And we've now realized, no, it can be universal being original. It doesn't need to be, exactly the same.
I think you're right. I think we confused like universal with unoriginal and to begin with,
or standard, traditional.
Standard and traditional, and had to kind of go through that learning journey.
I guess I haven't pondered it a second. MacGuffin and Co.'s Odd Jobs, their micro settings book. Original settings, they're all very interesting, quite odd. They're all system agnostic. They've got no mechanics tied to them really. They managed to get away with a whole bunch of very interesting stuff that is system agnostic. And avoid some of those pitfalls.
So Martin asks, and we've covered it a bit, but let's just go back into it and see if there's any more to pop out from under any rocks. Martin asks, what advantages do you gain and what disadvantages do you have to consider when going system free? I mean, I guess system agnostic isn't system free, right?
Whoa, yeah, maybe. I guess for me, with Beside the Less Travel Room, what I've made, they're basically the same thing, I guess. So I'll answer from that front. The advantages are it can work for any DM. The disadvantage is, I kind of mentioned it, mechanics can be an issue and mechanical encounters. There's a few things that we advise the DM make people roll on. And we've had to be quite broad with that, of course, because you can't say do a strength check, because that's very specific. Potentially means slightly different things in different systems. So we've had to be quite careful with the language there. Combat as well. We can, again, we've had to keep it quite broad. Part of that's the limited word count for each entry. But part of that is, of course, because you can't say drop in 5 goblins here, because it's going to depend wildly on the system and the level of the party, and stuff like that. So in that terms, again, I've stayed quite broad, but descriptive of the type of enemy that we would want to see here. We've used some sort of a malicious critter, and in that case we sort of meant something like a goblin or something like that, mischievous little evil guys. So sidestepping those pitfalls and finding the right language for it and stuff's been, it's tricky, but it's not really the point of the scenes anyway. The point is the role play that stuff sort of spurs on or happens around. And I think worth it for the advantage, which is broad use, and that it can suit many people.
Yeah, I mean, like it's interesting what you were saying there about the critters and so on. Like one of the things that we settled on was, in addition to, because we came up with our kind of generic terms for tests, and it had like a little explainer being like, in your game it might be called this or this or this or this, like all the kind of main ones. But when it came to combat encounters, what we did have is like a challenge indicator, and we're like basically this combat should be easy for the PCs. It's just a minor speed bump. This should be really hard because this is the climax, and if they've chosen to attack this thing, it's going to be a very hard fight. Or this should be a reasonably even match combat. And we figured that's often enough steering for balance for GMs to get the sense of, and again with like little descriptors of, if they're struggling a bit, here's the convenient cavalry that can come in and help. Or if it's a bit easy, why not have a kind of boss turn up to deal with it?
Yeah, I think trusting the DMs in that way is the way to do system free and system agnostic stuff, right? You have to believe that anyone who's far enough along DMing to be finding system agnostic stuff to use is going to be able to roughly tune a combat to easy, difficult, impossible.
Yeah, like all DMs are fundamentally like game designers as well, right? Like fundamentally, they're designing a game at their table. Which I think is why some people love it and become forever DMs, and some people hate it.
Yes,
they're just like, not for me. I don't want that.
I feel like the psychologist in me is coming out, and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, I wonder how that translates to what DMs do in like real life, and like, could you do the 5-factor personality test? And would they have like fundamentally different profiles? Like, what drives someone to be a GM? Because for me, it was always really like, even before I met Andy Lawton, he became our forever GM because he's so amazing at it. Like, I never really wanted to do it, but if I had, I found it too, like, it was scary and it was impenetrable, and I could never quite get my head around the idea of being the one who decided almost everything. And I wonder, like, and other people I've seen just like jump into it and are like, yeah, of course I'll like pick up the book and learn how to do it and tell stories for you guys. Like, that's second nature to me. And I find that really interesting. And then there's people like you, Andy, who could probably, like, you like to be a player, but you have been a GM and you can GM and you don't, you quite like that too.
Yeah. It is interesting. And I think part of it as well, and again, this is, and there is something when we're talking specifically about system agnostic. I think, as you said, Josh, for people, you have to trust people that are finding or seeking out or discovering system agnostic stuff will be that. I think, that is one of the advantages of system agnostic is the chances are people picking up and playing your system agnostic stuff are interested in playing and will, to go back to that last question, will probably already be or will happily join a community of developing and implementing and changing and modifying and creating naturally. But I suppose the disadvantage is, if we address the 5th edition elephant in the room, so many people just play D&D, and it's not a dig at D&D, but a lot of time if people just play D&D, if that's their only experience, and if really all they're doing is playing preset modules or whatever, they can, not always, but they can get into a habit of a certain type of storytelling, i.e. just roll and kill dungeon bashing, where it basically turns into something more like Hero Quest than what I would think of as a role-playing game. And the skills needed to DM that type of game are different than one that is a bit more kind of narrative heavy or a bit more discussion and character heavy. Does that make sense?
I suspect those people aren't going to be the folks filtering down to our type of products anyway. So, it sounds a little bit callous, but they're not necessarily who I've got in mind when I'm writing. Almost disregard them, in fact. Because I figure by the time people are finding indie system agnostic stuff, they're ready to jam and improv things a little bit. They're a little bit more experienced, or maybe not. They're just at a point where they're ready to sort of dive into that sort of stuff.
Yeah, they're open to it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. But I suppose the disadvantage of not being able to tap into that market is a fiscal one, right? That's the
I plenty of folks who make a good living off of D&D, Pathfinder freelance, and writing modules for them. It's where I started off, actually. That's what we did at first. It's it's got its place. It's it just happens to not be what I'm aiming for right now. Nothing wrong with it.
No, exactly.
Just target a different audience.
So we've talked a bit about the lesser traveled road, but I wondered if we could talk a little bit about kickstarting it and your experience of that. Have you done a Kickstarter before? Like, how was it? And it's still open for late pledges, right? So would you like to tell us a little bit about what people get if they pledge?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first pledge up there is the digital PDF. I believe that's £12, because obviously the second I stopped obsessively checking the Kickstarter, it's all left my mind.
Yes. Well, we've got the link up there, so don't worry about telling people the specifics. Yeah. We'll keep.
Yeah, we then got, of course, the physical copy. It's going to be perfect bound. I mean, it looks like it's going to be about 140 pages, which really bloated past a zine, because I got carried away. But that's a better product, I think. Past that, we've got a selection of goodies. Josh whipped up some really fantastic art assets, and he sells like a lot of Norse inspired goodies and t-shirts and bits like that. Both of us are partial to a trinket, so we like providing them and designing them. So yeah, we've got some. I'm actually excited to get my hands on them. We've got some cool little key rings with a cool sword design from one of the scenes on it, and some bits like that, and stickers. We've got a wee wooden badge there and some bits. But yeah, the core pledge is for the book or the digital copy.
And do you think you'll be at any cons this year? Will people be able to come and see you in person?
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely love doing the conventions. Next one coming up is UKGE, of course, the big one. Josh Wakerely and I have got a stall right in Hall 3. We'll be right close next to the door. I think we're opposite Chaosium and neighbours to Rowan, Rick and Deckard. We should have beside the Lesser Travel Road, and it's a sorted loot ready for GE. So we should have that on the stand as well. Yeah, drop by and visit us. I love chatting, and it's why I really enjoy conventions. So yeah, come have a chinwag.
Yeah, I do love a con, and but I always spend too much money, as Andy Lease, because he's usually there with me, can attest that I'll just go around like a magpie and buy oh, Josie would like that, Laurie would like that.
At tabletop last year, I think I failed to understand my mission. In that I think I was supposed to be trying to rein you in, and instead we just both kept egging each other on.
Yeah,
and
what
we
about
both ended up
this?
spending
Yeah.
far more money.
At one
you
point
should get that.
Yeah, but at one point we were standing by the custom-made games table, weren't we? And that was like getting a little bit too much. It was like, what? Yeah, well, the size of one we'd need, Andy, to fill that room, it maybe starts at $8,000. Like, maybe
I think it was north of that. I think it was more than that.
Yeah, it probably was.
Yeah.
Rein back in. Luckily, Andy Law wasn't with us for that one, so we couldn't actually make any decisions because he would need to have a big input. Yeah. He's just
as bad as us, if not worse, though, isn't he? So
well,
we would have left carrying a table on our back, I suspect, if he'd been there too.
To be fair, I would say he's not. He will always. Even if I'm not there, what you probably won't see is he'll be messaging me to ask for. So I'm always the final say on the money. So yeah,
that's what I mean. He certainly wouldn't have reined either of us in.
No, he wouldn't have reined either of us in. No.
Yeah, I've done fantastic business at a con and still walked away at a loss because I immediately spent it.
Yeah, there's just so much nice stuff, and what I particularly like are like the small creators that like you will never really find, like the kind of Etsy sized crafty, like they're making you stuff to go along with your games, because although I said before about being a GM, like I found it really overwhelming to be in charge of the whole story. That doesn't mean that people who are not GMs aren't creative, as we were talking about before we went live, but my creation is often like bespoke journals for my character and all stuff like that, and so there's always stuff that I'm like, oh, leather bags in the colorway of my character. Well, I've got 3 characters right now, so I'm gonna need 3 colorways, and I might want them in different sizes. I mean, you never know. Yeah,
I am such a sucker for leather notebooks, like so many leather notebooks, but or wooden ones, or
I've had to stop buying bullet journal, like the dotted ones, because I've got too many stacked up and ready to go. Like I've probably got enough for the next 5 years. So
we just need to play more games. That's the solution.
Yeah, that's the solution. Oh. So we don't know if we'll be at UK Games Expo yet, but if we are, come and see us too. We're just need to chat with Modiphius about what they're doing and what we're doing regarding Dark Deeds. But if we're there, we will come and see you, Josh.
Yeah, wonderful. It'd be great to meet you in person.
Yeah. Right, so back to the system-agnostic questions. So, Shadishan asks, could you give examples of when you feel a system-agnostic approach has worked particularly well, and also where it's presented unexpected challenges?
Yeah, certainly. So, I suppose one of the ones that's gone particularly well, I was writing it today as it happens. It's the only shelter you can find already has someone set up there who's particularly and incessantly defeatist and negative. No part of that interaction and him being a pain in the ass all night to your characters needed any hard mechanics tied to it. There's definitely going to be some points in there where DMs might want to add in some roles, charisma rolls or something to that effect. But yeah, at no point did it need a hard system to back it up. And I think being freed of what a system might impose upon that, D&D, there would definitely be some hard checks, and that might affect how things were written. So I think that one's excellent for being system agnostic. The challenge is definitely avoiding avoiding having to be too specific with combat and stuff like that in the occasions where it might break out. One or two feature a sort of a puzzle or something akin to get players chatting amongst themselves and working towards a thing together. They're all designed to sort of rely on role play over roles, but not really having, not being able to fall back on a system for a way to do those bits of the encounters. Can be quite a challenge. I think for the most part, with it being role play focused, we've skipped over a lot of those pitfalls because I think that's the bit you need to roll dice for at least.
Yeah, that's absolutely the like it's as soon as you start getting into the mechanics of resolution, I suppose, when it's narrative or conversation that's resolving it, it is much more straightforward. One of the things I really like about the system agnostic stuff we've done, and I'll pop a link in a second, but not while I'm talking because I cannot multitask.
You can't do both.
I can. I could try and I would fail both of them. But when we did, obviously I've already showed a link to Well of Bones, but when we did, and it's in Well of Bones as well, but also Mother Horfrost, like, because we were sort of freed up a little bit, because you do, the more you play a system, the more you write for a system, you begin to think along that system's lines. And obviously, all of us have done a lot of work for WFRP 4th edition. So, and both we'd been playing WFRP since 1st edition the whole way through, and kind of writing the 4th edition. So we really were in our heads around like careers and things, and like trying to structure things. Particularly in 4th edition, there's a very structured, very balanced sort of set of career system. And what was nice about doing it system agnostic, because there's the Oak Wives in Mother Horfrost, and there's the Sorrowers in Well of Bones, where we kind of did a career, but we stepped back and we're like, what do we, if we take away the mechanics of that, if we take away the at tier 1 you get these stat bonuses, at tier 2 you get these stat bonuses and this talent, and if we step back a little bit from that and thought, well, what do we want to be conveyed in this? And like the Oak Wives, I think particularly, like there's like social and cultural details that we added there that we probably would have added some of that anyway, but there was much more of a focus on the social details and the human details, to go back to our earlier conversation, the human details of playing one of these characters, playing somebody who belonged to this group of people, which is fascinating. And like, it's actually, like, to me, both as a writer and as a player, of more interest than the mechanical rules. If I'm playing with it, I need those mechanical rules as well, because I need someone to spend my XP on and to know how to get better in the game, because that's what the game is. But what I'm more interested in, and I guess, thinking about it in going right back to my youth of like wargaming and stuff, like I was always much more interested when you got the army books. I was much more interested in the stories and the fluff and the you needed the army list, you needed the points, you needed the stats to play the game, but I would spend hours reading the little bits of color text and a little kind of background. And what I found was that when writing for system agnostic stuff, it was easier to put that in, because you were freed a little bit. The only constraint was your world building and your narrative. It wasn't like, well, I have to give them that because it's a tier 2 career, and tier 2 careers need that much. Like, I could do away with balance, I could do away with rules, and I could just focus on world building, which I found very rewarding.
We had that question earlier on from Eris Shrugged about the systems coming with a certain amount of character to them. And I think that is where system agnostic stuff works well. And that is not seeking to replicate the career or the class or whatever the system that the players that play your game might be using have, but like you say, Andy, adding like the flavor of how you could interpret that differently. And actually, like, I've learned from the stuff we've been doing on the Lawhammer Patreon and other stuff, that people are always asking about the social details and the details that are not covered in the rules. So recently someone was asking about like sin points in Wifrip. So if you're a blessed, like if you're in the priest career, you can get sin points, right? If you're blessed, and they were like, is there just a hard cutoff? And I was saying, well, actually, I had originally been going to write a supplement for Cubicle 7 called Everybody Sins, which covered like lay people and ordained people and priests and saints, and it just gave like a different, broader way of like interacting with the, in that case, the Wifrip system. But that could be system agnostic. Like you could present that and just be like, here's the way that people, humans, well, it doesn't have to be humans, but in this case it is, like humans interact with a system of priestliness and deities and gods, and here's how, like, here's some suggestions. And that's the questions that people always seem to have. They have questions about the lore more than the mechanics.
Yeah.
And I think that is the strength of the system agnostic approach.
Yeah, I guess to build on that, whilst using an existing system might give you some structure and a foundation, at some point it's going to impose its system on either the way you're thinking or the way though you execute those ideas, and yeah, not being influenced in those ways hopefully leads to some more interesting content.
Mm-hmm. So Martine has asked, again, we've covered this a little bit, but let's just go into it a bit deeper, specifically from the question Martine has asked. So how would you handle stats that range as broadly as a tiny child to a giant dragon without a system underpinning your supplement?
Yeah, it's trusting the DM with that sort of stuff again. Yeah. It really, it does keep coming back to that. It's been a bit of a design philosophy. It's something I've, it's been discussed a lot with freelancers as they're writing. And yeah, there's large bits where it's like, hey, don't worry, we haven't got to include that. Trust the reader a bit. They're going to get it. They will understand what you mean when you say this should be a challenging encounter, or this should be almost a sideshow. It should be so trivially easy. The DM's going to pull enemies out and suit that giant dragon to the system and to their campaign anyway. I think any DM is going to be running those tiny adjustments to fit the story they're trying to tell. So yeah, just trust them. When I say this should be some sort of challenging undead, there'll be a list of ideas they've got for their campaign from their source books.
And I think you kind of touched a bit on it before, that maybe system agnostic is not the first place you would jump in if you're a DM starting out in your TTRPG journey. But there's really great resources for DMs who are starting off, like starter packs, like even in D&D, I've seen that they're doing quite a lot of work in like presenting stuff for even younger people, so kind of like the 10+ age range. I've seen like books in Blackwells and stuff that are like presenting D&D in that in a way that's much more easier for a younger kid to engage with. And we had Matt Forbeck on last week talking about Minecraft TTRPG, and I think like naturally things that are aligned to things that young people and kids are playing are a really good entry point for them. And then if they really get into role playing, then you kind of, as a DM, you sort of start to, like, I don't know if it's Andy Law or you, Andy Lee, that have described like DMs as like the constant like hungry maw that just requires more content. And once you've kind of gone through all that stuff, you're like looking for more stuff, and then you really value like things that have a different way of looking at something or bring something new to the table that you haven't thought of before, and can make you go, oh yeah, I could try that because I haven't tried that with my players, or I haven't tried that as a DM myself, or I haven't tried that within this particular system, because it's not, that system's not necessarily like, its resources aren't designed for that. But that's where system agnostic comes in and is like, well, we're here, like mountain of creative people to provide you with content for your hungry maw of encounters.
That's it. And like where you said there, Josh, that in terms of your philosophy of trust the GM, which I like.
I like that,
I think that's sort of the point, though, isn't it? Is that system agnostic is essentially a philosophy. Like it's not an absence of something in your system. It's a conscious choice you're making when designing and presenting what you're doing, and that's something that has evolved over hours. So from our kind of Well the Bones and Mother Horrorfrost and into what's coming in Ship of Fools and the rest of it, is we're really trying. Like it's that classic thing of when you know the when you spot the little faults in things, you're like, oh, that would be, you know, and it's not major things, but like, you know, like the old adage about like a little splinter on a piece of wood, and it's tiny, but you run your finger over it and you feel it. Like when you realize how often things like adventures particularly are written with a novelist's mindset rather than a DM's mindset. So they're written with a linear narrative of this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, which is not necessarily the reality of what happens at a table, and that then becomes a problem. So we've really tried with our philosophy in terms of how we're like producing materials for DMs to make it, with it, even though it's a printed book, to make it much more conversational, to make it much more, we're actually talking directly to the DM, not just about what's going to happen, but about what type of story they might be able to tell, how they might want to change that story that they're telling, what to do if the story that they're telling derails and goes off in a different way, and here's some things to kind of think about that. So equipping them with like a toolbox of other things to use, but also like very consciously that the conversation is at that. Like the way I don't know if this makes sense. We were talking last night about neurodivergence and brains and thinking and visualizing and stuff, and it might be because I'm an English teacher and I spend so much of my time annotating literature. So like, you know, having Shakespeare, and either digitally or on like a visualizer digital camera, like kind of like annotating it with a pen to get the kids to do that as well. Like we're almost providing an annotated copy of our own adventure. So there's the core adventure like you might get in other stuff, but then we're including in boxes and asides our own annotations to be like, oh, hey, here's what this means, and here's how you could do that. And yeah, just conceptually to me, that's how it kind of makes sense. So,
I mean, I guess to give an example of that I came into contact quite recently, it's not system agnostic, but it was the Lancer adventure, No Room for a Wallflower. Fantastic adventure. I'm looking to run it soon, and I suppose I'll report back about that. But you know, you mentioned, Andy, the reality of running an adventure, and they never go from A to B to C.
No.
DMs are very used to making those micro adjustments and sort of improving things back into position after the deck gets muddied. And Lancer, I think, takes that to an extreme. I would recommend reading that adventure just as, you know, for sort of design inspiration, actually. The story can branch wildly from about the 1/3 point, and can skip sort of a dozen encounters at a time that are on a completely separate branch. And they've done a fantastic job of being able to say, in a very short patch at the beginning of certain encounters where things might reconverge, they will say players might be getting into this from scene 4, scene 10, or scene, you know, 11, 12. If they did this branch, this character might not survive, so remove them. In that case, this person does that instead. This enemy might not be present if they've done this. And it's condensed, it's super concise in the story, but they've managed to provide a very helpful, I think, framework to deal with that. But it is something I've brought into Beside the Lesser Traveled Road, where, you know, you can kind of trust DMs to make those adjustments, and you can provide a little bit of help to sort of help them get there.
That's it. It's almost giving you a, you know, you just a nudge in the right direction in case you get that. Like, it hasn't happened to me a lot when I've been DMing, but there have been times where the party have done something that's so unexpected to me that I've had to just take a moment and be like, okay, guys, we're just going to take a break. I'm sitting here and be like, oh my God, like, oh, you killed that guy. But I needed him for the next scene. What am I going to, And sure enough, you calm down, you get your breath, and you work at what you're going to do. But having little nudges that you could just look at and go, oh, that's what I'll do. That's what I'll do if it goes wrong. Great. I can relax now. I don't have to worry about it. So,
yeah, see, it might have been because I started mainly DMing Dark Heresy, which Warhammer, Inquisition, investigation heavy. That encourages that sort of improvisational DMing where, hey, if your players come up with something that's sort of not mentioned that might actually be a really good clue, let them pursue it and then have that lead back into the next thing, like the clue that's written might have done. I tend not to write campaigns as much as I will write some very broad plot for the villain and some stuff that's happening around it, and then I'll write the next session, and the players will interact with it and nudge things out of place, and normally I can go, well, you know what, actually, obviously this lieutenant of the bad guy is going to get moved in, he's going to get shipped in to manage this area now because they killed the last one that I wasn't expecting them to win. They were meant to run away from that and they didn't. And then, actually, because the bunch of pyromaniacs burnt down this base, blew it up with gunpowder or whatever, what's that going to do to the bad guys' schemes? And I provide myself a framework and then kind of go session by session, and just let the players take it in a direction and just work with it.
So we've got probably time for one more question, so I'm going to pick one from the chat. So Mark has a quick-fire question. Top 5 system-agnostic products you recommend checking out, obviously including your own. So
I saw Mark ask that, and I've been trying to think of more than two.
Yeah, more than two. Two's fine.
Right now, beside the Lesser Travel Road,
of course,
and Odd Jobs is absolutely fantastic for that. Past that, I've done that thing where someone says, "Hey, do you want to make a song request?" And
you just can't. Yeah.
You could have sworn you've never heard a song before.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah,
what even is a song?
What's that word? Song? Soon.
Yeah.
Odd Jobs, I think, is absolutely fantastic for for system agnostic setting stuff. They really jam with some interesting bits in there. The ideas are just curious, because there's 10 of them. They really get to just get really jazzy with the ideas, really out there. I don't think I've really seen anything like most of them. And hopefully beside the Lesser Travel Road will be some useful content for folks.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I will just pop there's the link to MacGuffin and Company, and please do remember to follow Josh over on Blue Sky, and Andy has shared the link further up in the chat to the late pledge for the Kickstarter, so please do go and check that out. Thank you so much for joining us today, Josh. It's been a pleasure to meet you. I hope we get to meet in person at some point at a con. And yeah, as always, thanks Andy for joining me on the panel, and thanks to our patrons who wonderfully keep our Inside the Rookery streams lovely and ad-free. So yeah, any parting thoughts? Josh, what's next after beside the Lesser Traveled Road?
First up, thank you so much for having us. It's been fun. Love getting to sort of talk shop with obviously talented designers. It's one of the best parts of the scene, right? Hopefully I'll see you at GE. I'd be absolutely lovely to catch up. As for what's next, I've got some big plans for Brother Wire, my boxed game. There might be more coming and penned out in the Lesser Traveled Road series. Upon the Lesser Traveled Road might be the next one.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. You could have a whole
That could become a franchise. Yeah.
Yeah,
We got a franchise.
quite a lot. We might have a Wii franchise planned. When the next one will come, I don't know. I think past that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Above the Lesser Traveled Road, your expansion for airships, personally. So just just putting that out there.
Yeah, next to the Lesser Traveled Road, of course.
Yeah.
All about walking next to a perfectly good road and dealing with substandard footing.
Yeah.
I'm actually...
we're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the lesser travelled road.
Yeah. I'm actually gutted that we didn't get time to talk about Brother Y, because I was really intrigued about that. So we'll maybe have to have you on another time to talk a little bit more about that.
Guys.
It would be amazing. Brilliant.
Yeah, I'll come back anytime. Been lovely.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone in the chat. It's been great that you've all popped in. As Secondhand Samurai says, cheers for another good show. Thank you. We'll see you again next week for another Inside the Rookery. But until then, good night. And all that's left for me to say is caw-caw, caw-caw. See you soon.